Hello, I'm here with Alex Kozachenko, president of Hyperbeard, and he's in charge of business, marketing, systems, and operations. Hyperbeard is an amazing studio based in Mexico City, focusing on mobile games. They've had some phenomenal hits with some great stats, and we're here to talk to Alex about how he's building a long-term business with mobile games. Alex, thanks very much for being here and joining us at the Business of Indie Games. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. So I'll dive straight in. Please tell us a little bit about the story behind your game development career and how did you get into creating mobile games?
Sure. So about 5 years ago, I joined an ad tech company called AppSavvy based in New York. It was a VC-funded company, and I was doing publisher operations at the time. And I worked with a bunch of mainly Facebook game developers, not Zynga, but Playdom, various other ones that were around at the time. And we just started getting into mobile. So I started working with some mobile developers. One of the big ones was Scopely. We were one of their early ad partners. And from there, I realized that I really like games. That company went under. They did not survive. They were one of the many ad tech companies. But through that, I ended up running a company that was based in San Francisco with a team in Ukraine. And actually, we were doing various outsourced development stuff for a while. And one of my conditions of joining that company was that I would be able to publish my own game. So I tried to take a team that was
nicely negotiated.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't really know much about game development then, and nor did I realize really the difference between a game developer and a regular systems or app developer. And that project did not go very well for many reasons. But I nonetheless had the bug, and I ended up finding a team in Mexico. The founder of Hyperbeard, my partner Antonio Uribe, had already built a few games, not commercially successful, but very tight, very small experiences, and actually ended up hiring him to work with me. We ended up creating a game called The Balloons, which we published with Noodle Cake Studios, who are based in Canada, who are a well-known publisher. That project went really well up until launch. And then we realized the importance of testing before launch and retention rates and all that stuff. And actually, right before we were about to die, we basically had 2 or 3 months of runway left. And we said, well, what idea can we build in 3 months? And we had this small little cat game, which we called Cat Z at the time. It was about cat who you sent out. He brought something back and put it in a basket. And it was a silly little prototype. I think I even told the team at one point that it was really, really stupid. But we said, okay, well, we can polish this. And we did. And sure enough, users loved it. We added some more dimensions to the game. And within 2 to 3 months, we launched it. And then it just kind of took off. And that was Kleptocats, which has done really, really well for us. So that was kind of my intro into gaming.
Did your background in the ad tech help at all with it? What were the reasons for it taking off?
So not on the user acquisition side. Most of our growth was organic and viral. So at my prior company, we focused a lot on viral app growth. So that was helpful. Where my background in ad tech has really helped is on the monetization side and understanding the balance between in-app purchases and advertising, understanding how it affects retention, how it can enhance retention. That's kind of been the key to having that background.
How well did it do? Can you share some stats with us on that?
Yeah, so it made about $1 million in the first year. So for a studio that was based in Mexico, basically making no revenue, that was obviously very, very good for us.
That must have been fantastic. What did that feel like?
It felt like a breath of fresh air. It was a relief. It felt like we knew what we were doing, and I think we realized afterwards we didn't quite know yet. But it definitely pushed us in a direction which has enabled us to kind of figure out a more scalable model.
Yeah, sure. I mean, tell us, do you mind going a little bit deeper into what do you think its success was? Because we get so many people talking about their games and talking about the struggles, and every day we hear about stories of good games that don't reach anybody. Yet you generated $1 million with it. What was the secret? Or was there a secret?
Sure. So I don't know if it's necessarily a secret, but one thing that we've really specialized is creating tight little experiences. And if you think about games the way we do, which is for a user to play your game in 30 days, they have to play your game in 29 days. And if you work that all the way back, basically to day one, for a user to play your game after a single day, they have to play your game for at least 5 minutes. And so what we really focus on is that first 5 minutes of experience and making sure that that's as tight as possible, that the user does not experience fatigue, that they can get through without any confusion. So, I think we have a much tighter experience, whereas a lot of game developers, I think, especially game developers who are switching from, or at least just entering the industry and coming in pretty fresh, they think about their experience with games on console or on Steam, and most of those games are paid games. And the difference between a paid game and a free game, which Kleptocats is a free-to-play game, is that when you pay for something, you're more likely to play it, even if it doesn't explain everything to you, even if it is confusing in certain parts. I recall playing Pokemon for the Game Boy when it first came out, and one of the only ways to play it, kind of as a young person, was to actually buy a manual that told me basically everything to do. And the game itself didn't tell me that, but you spend $30 on a game and you're invested in it. And that investment just doesn't exist on mobile, because usually most things are free to play, or they're $1 or $2 or $3. So being able to handhold the user and create that first experience is something that we've really focused on and specialized in. And then Kleptocats had that kind of X factor, I think. It went beyond that, and it paced very well, but beyond, more so than that, it brought in various viral elements by having different things that the cats would bring back, and they'd be interesting. There's kind of a story in the first room where you start to bring back certain items, and you bring back magnets that go on the refrigerator, and they start to spell out a word, and it spells out the word help. Or the cat brings back a knife, or brings back a phone, and on the phone it says, "Are you okay?" And these kind of elements kind of took off virally. People started posting them online, started posting videos about them. So it had that X factor, but more so than that, it was a really, really tight experience. And that is kind of how we've approached game development ever since.
How quickly did those sales come in? Did it go like viral straight away? Was there a period of like word of mouth? Clearly you must have had a mechanic that appealed to a very wide range of people.
Yeah, so it was it was easy to play. So anyone could pick it up, whether you were a kid or an adult, whether you had any game experience or not. I mean, our demographic is about 80% female, so not your typical kind of game target. But they're really easy to play. There's basically no skill gap, or there really is no skill gap. So it took off pretty quickly. We actually knew, so one of the first things we did with this game, which we didn't do with the prior one, is we decided to publish it by ourselves. And in doing so, we also decided to soft launch it, because we saw our game, The Balloons, that we published with Noodle Cake, came out with, I think, a day one retention rate of about 10%, which is why it basically did terribly and died really quickly. So with this game, we decided to publish it ourselves, and we saw that the retention rates were really strong. Retention rates are something that we only optimize for a couple things during soft launch, and one is retention, and usually early retention, and really the onboarding process, which actually is a corollary function to retention. On mobile, the longer you get someone playing, especially in a free-to-play game, where you have microtransactions and advertising as your revenue source, the longer you get someone to play, the more money you'll make. And we've chosen, as a more creatively inclined company than necessarily an analytical company, to focus on fewer metrics, but just to be rigid in how we focus on them. So we don't do a ton of conversion tracking or in terms of monetization. We try to apply certain best practices or things that seem like they work well, but we don't put a ton of effort into setting up the systems in order to track them and then iterate on them, because we only have so much time for our dev cycles. Usually we'll launch a game in anywhere from, globally launch a game anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Anything longer than 6 months is uncomfortably long for us. And usually we kind of, we space out. We really try to be rigid in what we focus on and what we don't focus on.
Yeah, sure. So it sounds like rigid focus, but actually, working with fewer metrics, I suppose you can perfect them easier.
Yeah, that's it. It's true.
And so that success was with Kleptocats. Was Clawbert also as successful?
So Clawbert wasn't as big, but it was very successful. So Clawbert probably made about 40% over the course of the year what Kleptocats made. Clawbert was our first follow-up that had a level of success that made us feel like we knew what we were doing. It was actually made by another team, and that team iterated a couple of ideas before, but then kind of defaulted to Clawbert, which was utilize a lot of the mechanics that Kleptocats does. The idle waiting mechanics, kind of the cute focus, the very rigid retention, or focus on day one retention. Clawbert, we actually, we put that on early access after 2 weeks of working on it. It looked in some ways like crap. We really hadn't had time to polish it. But we said that in order to get to the point of the game quickly, we were going to be really rigid in our deadlines. And that really helped it. Actually, despite adding a ton of polish to it, despite adding a ton of bells and whistles that make Clawbert as special as it is, the day one retention rates never really changed past the 2-week mark, which kind of goes to show you that you kind of have your core game mechanic, and it's really hard to change that. So you really have to be careful and strict in how you approach that and get to the point quickly, because if your day one retention rates are low, your day 30 retention rates aren't going to be very good either.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's really useful. When you compare the two, what were the differences, do you think? Was one just a more compelling mechanic than the other? Were you able to capitalize on the learnings from the success?
So I think success is the worst teacher. We learn more from our failures. And I'd say that every single time. We keep learning the same thing sometimes over and over again. I think the reason Kleptocats was bigger had to do with the market. It was more open. I think there was more exposure in getting featured by the App Store and the Google Play Store. It was also cats. Cats go big. So I think that helped out. Whereas Clawbert, it's a claw. It's a claw that's from a claw machine, but it doesn't have that kind of immediate appeal that Kleptocats has.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That cute appeal.
Yeah, and it's still cute. It still appeals to the same audience. A lot of people say it's our best game yet, but Kleptocats had that kind of that IP extension factor that we've actually utilized. So I mean, Kleptocats has spawned a series of plushies by Funko. It spawned a book that's projected to sell 300,000 copies.
That's Scholastic, right?
Yeah, with Scholastic. So that's headlining the book fairs all over the U.S., which is really cool. I mean, it's pretty cool, and one of the things we do think about now, and it's really not our core business, but we do think about the brand extension of IPs as we make them. So, can they potentially extend outward? Because, sometimes you want to increase the long tail revenue, and that doesn't necessarily just mean digital revenue. It could come from somewhere else.
For Kleptocats, are you making like a Kleptocats 2 and 3 and 4, etc.?
Yeah. So we made a Kleptocats 2, came out earlier this year, performed extremely well. It is pretty much pacing on par with the original Kleptocats, which I think, we were happy about. I think it's really hard to create a sequel and have that perform just as well. Sometimes it works. I think Plants vs. Zombies did it in a different way. Other games, they've tried, and they may or may not be as successful for different reasons.
It's a rare occurrence, isn't it?
It is. And, we said when we launched Kleptocats 2, we were going to make something different about it. And it's not just the same game twice. It's there's a lot different to it. You can tell it's a much more built up game. But we did make Klepto Dogs, which is basically like Kleptocats, but with dogs. That one is much more similar to the original, and that also did very well this summer. So there may be more Klepto games in the future, but we haven't figured out yet what we want to do with Kleptocats 3. But we want to do something pretty special with that.
Right. Yeah. Fabulous. Because you've probably got an audience there who would be hungry for more.
Yep.
And so how did these ideas come about? And also, how long do they take to make on average? How long does one game to make against getting back $1 million?
Sure. So Kleptocat, and a lot of people hate us for this, but Kleptocats was built, I think the prototype was built in a day or two. And I said when they sent it to me, I was with my prior company, I was in Ukraine, sent it to me, and I said, this is the stupidest thing in the world. No one's ever going to like this. And of course, we ended up coming back to it. And I think we spent probably about 3 weeks before we soft launched it. We started getting the retention rates back, iterated on it for about a month or a month and a half, and then launched it. So not more than 3 months, kind of all in. And we do work on them.
Do you think people hate you for that, or are they actually just jealous?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's like you said earlier. There are great games that launch all the time that don't make it, and it's an unfortunate reality of the business. Is it's not just the game itself; it's the marketing and the positioning. And the brand is a piece of that too. And Kleptocats checked off a lot of those boxes, whereas some of the great games don't necessarily do that. We with all of our games, we try to get to the point really quickly, because if you can't figure it out in about a month, what the core loop is, then the rest of the game is not going to come together, and you're just kind of wasting your time. So we've seen that probably time and time again, and the more games we launch, the more we kind of hone in on that. So getting the game loop right, if you've got a good designer and you practice and you make a few games, that can be well done, well replicated. But that intangible success, that you get, like, how do you find your audience? How do you decide, what kind of game to make, and where are the people that you market to? Sure. So it's a little bit, it's two things. One is by having success with Kleptocats and then with Clawbert, neither game did we start out by saying that they were going to market to a female targeted kind of mid-teen to early adult audience. But that's kind of where that the game settled on, just naturally. And we've been kind of going after that market more concertedly over the last probably year or so, just because we know that we can hit that market. We understand it. We know the things that they like about games, the things that they don't like.
Can we
Yeah.
come back to the stats a little bit? Yeah, well, while you think about,
Sure.
you know, can you tell us about daily and monthly active users and stuff like that?
Sure. So we, at the moment, we are at about 250,000 daily active users across our portfolio, which we consider about 10 games. It's probably got 4 or 5, which are of more sizable value, and about 2 million MAU. So we really do look at our thing as a portfolio. And like we just discussed in targeting an audience, you know, we don't necessarily just look at, well, what is this next game going to do by itself? We look at what it's going to do for our portfolio. So every game that we put out, that's more revenue, which is why we try to put out more and more games. And that's kind of one of our main business strategies is, we don't know what the next Kleptocats is going to be. We don't necessarily know what the next Clawbird's going to be. But we do know how to make games really tight and really quickly. So we're better off putting more stuff to market that is tight and that's fun to play, that it's a good experience, because one of them might take off, one of them might not. But the longer we spend on something, and if it doesn't take off, that's a big problem for us. So
Yeah, of course. And where do you reach the people? Because I always think, like, you know, all the stuff I've done really is on console, PC, where I know I can get a bigger budget and, you know, hopefully reach a lot of people. And I always get frightened. I have done mobile stuff, but I get frightened on like the lack of shelf space, if you like. You know, you've just got a few centimeters to work with on the screen. How do you attract people to see your games? How do you reach them?
So initially, it was a lot of word of mouth and virality. We were able to get features for Kleptocats, not even necessarily great ones, but it happened to have that kind of that X factor that people wanted to share. We are the biggest mobile game publisher and developer in Mexico. And in that sense, we also are able to speak to our reps in Mexico, and that gives us kind of a leg up on necessarily, you know, being the 30th biggest developer in the USA, which I think is, and even though the US is a much bigger market, you know, obviously it's a very crowded market on the business side as well. But Apple and Google hold so much power right now in terms of what games they promote and what games they don't promote. So you really want to try and, if you're trying to put out a game and you don't have a solution in mind for how to get that exposure, you should either figure that out pretty quickly, find a partner that has some sort of access, because it's important, because that's a big thing, a big, you know, free basically service to get users. And we don't really buy users. It's something, going back to what I said about the analytics we do and don't focus on. Buying users is a very analytical game, where to buy them from, what budgets to spend, how much to spend in order to generate a certain number of free downloads. And that's something we've chosen just to not focus on for the moment. And that will probably change in the future. But for right now, we'd rather focus on game development and getting more games out, more better games, rather than necessarily how to buy users.
Sure. Do you drive any traffic from outside of the mobile environment, like from Facebook?
You know, we are very active on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a great social media manager. But we use social media mainly for kind of brand pushing and community support. Actually driving downloads from social is fairly difficult. If you want to get a dedicated number of users to something to test it, it's a great source. But if you want to just drive volume, it's just not that effective.
Thank you. That's very useful. So as I understand it, you have a really clear strategy for the company going forward as a studio. How do you plan to grow?
Sure. So our basic premise, which I guess is probably not that revolutionary, is if we can put out more games and also better games, we will be more successful. So we believe that those are not necessarily in contention with each other. Obviously, if we can get more people that understand how to make games the way we do, we can increase our volume. We also don't know, as I said earlier, what's going to stick, what's going to be the next big hit. So the more chances and the more opportunities we do to put something out, the more chances we have of getting that big hit. And as everyone knows, the mobile market is very much a hits-driven business. So what we're doing is we're just going to keep swinging, basically. To use a baseball analogy, we're going to keep swinging over and over again until we hit a home run.
Oh, that's great. And for the third-party publishing side of the business, are you using the normal model where you pay in advance and then development fees and a royalty?
So we are we have dealt in advances. It's not necessarily part of the deal, but yeah, there's usually a royalty split. So typical on mobile is in the 70-30 range, or if even 50-50. It can get really aggressive. I think if you partner with Tencent in China, they take 90% of the deal, but then again, they own the platform. So, we've seen there's a big market of developers out there that are looking for publishers, and far fewer publishers. So really, I guess you could say it's a publisher's market. So paying advances are not necessarily needed. But we also don't start a project without believing that we're going to hit a certain milestone in terms of revenue. And so we're willing to put some money up front just because we believe in the success of it. And also, I think it commits us to the project. Every game that we publish, whether we do that internally that we develop ourselves or externally, we want it to hit a certain quality level, and basically we treat it like it's our own. And I think that I don't know if that necessarily differentiates us, but certainly it helps our publishing partners, helps their game perform well.
Yeah, thank you. And you don't buy downloads necessarily. Do you invest money in some marketing?
So for publishing deals, we will invest during soft launch, basically to get users in to test, if it's needed. They also, Google Early Access even has its own featuring where you can get featured, and it'll drive 500 to 1,000 users a day, which is plenty to get all the data that you need. So we're not going to needlessly spend on users, just because, you're talking about, a good CPI for our games, probably in the, we can get as low as 30 cents sometimes, but it goes all the way up to $1. Whereas if you're getting 500 to 1,000 free users a day, that would be a lot of money if you were to buy those users. So what we promise our developer partners is, the ones that we're publishing, is that we'll work with them pretty hand in hand to focus on the analytics that they need to focus on. That we will obviously talk with Apple and Google when it comes time to early access the game, when it comes time to launch the game. We'll help them with all the marketing assets, the trailers, the audio sometimes, basically things that they're not necessarily specialized in. We may even help them with the art style, where we say this, what you're doing is the game you have is great, but if you want to appeal to a more mass audience, this is how you need to do it. So we're very hands-on. Our team is a bunch of game people. And so the idea of just being a marketing extension, which some publishers are, is kind of foreign to us. So we really like to get hands-on with things. And I think that's worked out for us so far.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. And do you share the IP, or do you keep the IP, or do you let the developer keep their IP when you work with a good new brand?
So we have not shared the IP yet. We let the developer keep it. We do reserve the right to produce a sequel if they don't want to, just because we've invested so much time and effort into promoting it. We want to make sure that, if for whatever reason, we produce $1 million hit and they don't want to follow it up because they're retired somewhere, we have the ability to do that. But we also believe that we're ahead of the game in terms of IP extensions. And in the case that someone does, in the case that opportunity comes, if Scholastic comes and says, we saw you publish this IP and we want to do a book on it, we believe the deal's there and we can work that out later. But ultimately, we're initially just focused on the game. It's their IP. We're just there to support, make them money, make us money, and make a great game.
Oh, that's great. And are you looking to acquire developers or at least IP in the future?
Probably not IP, maybe developers. You can only grow so quickly at a certain pace internally, and culture is very important to us. And we're planning to scale basically 2x a year, which, compared to some companies is not a lot, but for us, obviously, for every company that gets to that point, I think it is a lot. So we want to make sure to maintain our internal culture. And in that sense, we may look for other studios that do good work, that don't necessarily influence the direct culture that we've already created. And, so we're definitely open to it. And we've worked with multiple teams in the past, so we know how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it might work particularly if they're a genre specialist,
Oh yeah, yeah, and there are phenomenal developers all around the world. I mean, development teams that are creating great things, and they ultimately just don't know how to market it, or they don't have the resources to market it. And it's that same game that someone else is publishing, or that they are publishing themselves, which gets 1,000 downloads, in our hands or in another publisher's hands is going to be $1 million game. So those opportunities are out there, and it's just a matter of kind of finding them.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I mean, those opportunities are out there, and you've got to find them, but then you've also got to be able to turn those into sales. That seems to be the area that you've really mastered here.
Yeah, I guess. I think it's easier. I think, you said you're worried about mobile. I'd be worried about moving to console, because, we don't necessarily generate sales. We just generate playing.
What do they say? Shoemaker sticks to thy last, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So, if we can get people to play for a day, we'll get them to play for 2 days, and then we'll try to get them to play for 3 days. And that's, it's a very small, kind of a contained problem that we've been working on for about 3 years now. And I think we're getting better and better at it. And it's not this huge thing of, well, if I don't hit, 100,000 copies on, in the first month, then I've lost all this money. That's scary to me.
So you're planning to release 7 games this year, is that right?
We'll hit 7 for 2018 in a couple weeks. We have a game called Ukie Adventure coming out, which is a very interesting passive storytelling game. And actually, it's a publishing game, so we're working with a small team from Singapore. That will be the 7th game this year, up from 2 the prior year. Next year, we plan to release 8 to 10. We have a theory that, as I mentioned, the more hits we throw or that we try to make, the more likely we are to get a home run. At a certain point, that turns into a diminished return, where you're spending 6 months on a game and you're just kind of hurting it because you launched 2 games too quickly next to each other, and that's first of all, it's an operational headache, and actually trying to ramp up to a game, because every game is an emotional roller coaster. But more so than that, you're actually, you it is really diminished returns. I mean, you're just not getting the exposure that you would normally get if you were to space them out a little bit more. So our theory right now is that 8 to 10 is kind of the sweet spot. I think as many as 12 might be like the ideal, at least at the pace that we can develop games at. But anything more than that would probably be a diminished return. So I think after we hit, maybe 12 maximum, or even 8 to 10, we might start making more complex games that have a little bit more focus on the long-term retention. We might start specializing in other areas like user acquisition, that sort of thing.
Do you have any fancy tech that you use in-game to promote sequels or to retain customers?
Not really. We use Unity Analytics, which is basically out of the box. And our cross promo system is home baked. It's pretty simple. We don't try to keep things pretty light, just because, we really do try to focus on game development and very few analytics if we can. So.
So, I mean, it's quite incredible, your results here. And yet I can't seem to sort of get to the sort of secret sauce. Can you say anything else about like the marketing and acquisition and retention of customers?
I think you have to find a game that's highly retentive, or a genre or a type of game or something. So for us, I can't necessarily tell you why KleptoCats became what it did, but we can now concertedly launch games that are that have retention rates that are similar to KleptoCats. They don't necessarily do $1 million in a year, but they'll do 250,000 in a year. And the reason that is because, we've learned from the games that we've already launched. So if you're launching a particular type of game and you find out the retention rates are crap, you probably shouldn't launch another game like that. Or you need to iterate a lot. So every time we launch a game is another benchmark. So the more games that we launch, also the more we learn, the better we get at the marketing side of it. For everyone else, you do need to consider the marketing partner or the marketing side of things. If you just plan to put your game out and have it get downloads, which is, I think, how everyone starts to believe that's how it works. It's not. Usually it just falls into the oblivion. So find a partner that has that piece covered, or at least come up with a really good plan to how you're going to get downloads, because a lot of the things that people think get downloads, the social media, the PR, you can get covered by the New York Times and you'd be surprised at how few downloads you get. It's just not something that converts. It's paid user acquisition. It's getting featured by the App Store. It's organic, it's social, it's App Store optimization. Those are things that are going to work at mass scale. So have a plan in place, because otherwise you're going to be sorely disappointed when you launch the game.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful for our audience, actually. And I suppose you must also, of course, have a really good relationship with both Google and Apple.
We do, yeah. And we try to, one of the things is, it's not necessarily correlated highly with downloads, but obviously every game that we release, we try to make sure that we get the ratings really high. So we try to aim for basically a 4.7 or better. Ideally, most of our games you'll see are in the 4.5 plus range. Occasionally we'll launch a game that has a skill gap and that goes all the way down to a 4.0. But we try to reinforce our relationship by creating really great games and also supporting the games after they come out. So, we not only spend the 3 months to launch a game or the 6 months to launch a game, but we'll continuously update it, every 2 or 3 months with new content. So that way, Apple knows that if they support us, we will continue to support the games that they helped support initially.
Yeah, great. And you have a dedicated team to manage those relationships, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. Well, myself and my partner.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, yeah. It's two people who obviously really care about those relationships, right?
Yeah.
And can you say some of the specific ways that you've learned to improve the user interface and the experience for the player by the trial and error that you've been through?
So a lot of it is because we have a portfolio of similar games, a change that, or a learning that we learn in a future game will apply both backward and forward. One tip for user developers is, don't jump from a game that has, that is in one corner to a game that's all the way in another corner, because all your learnings are not going to necessarily be applicable. If we find a new way to redesign the store inside the game, or if we redesign the UI that switches people between rooms, or basically between content for us, that learning can then be applicable across multiple games, not only our games, but even for our developer partners. We'll take a chunk of our game and say, like, look, we've tested this. This is how you should do it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Because, one of the things that I think has been readily apparent over the last couple of years, especially on mobile, is users don't really care, or consumers don't really care about the lack of creativity in the user interface. If you find something that works, they will, and they like the gameplay mechanic, then they'll like the game. A perfect example is Clash Royale and Golf Clash. Is a great game. That's they've done a great job with it. But no one really cared when they just basically just stole that user interface. And of course, it's not trademarkable or anything. Don't reinvent the wheel when you don't have to. You don't have to get too clever with certain things. Get clever with your game. Your core game loop, your character development, your art. Get clever there, and then all the other stuff should just be easy to navigate. Part of the name too, so they were pretty shameless about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You've found ways to make your back end more efficient so that you can scale. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for game developers in terms of getting their games on time and in budget?
So it's a lot of define the core loop of your game and get there as quickly as possible. Prototype it, make it dirty, make it feel good though, after you make it dirty. Don't put things off till later. You should be able to hand off your game, and obviously it varies based on the complexity of the game. Certain games take longer to get to the core loop than others do. But if you're constantly not wanting to hand off your game, there's usually a reason for it, and it's usually a problem. If you can hand off your game within 2 weeks to a month, because someone can then pick it up and say, like, I like this, or I like how this feels, that's really what you're going for. And if you're just putting in placeholders and you're saying, well, I'll address that later, then you're just not doing that, and then you'll never really get to the core loop. And that can work. You just have to really hope that it comes together later, because if it doesn't, you just wasted a whole bunch of time. So get to the core loop quickly. And focusing on the tutorial too is a great way to do that, because it's the first experience someone has in the game. So thinking about, most people thinking about how a user will experience your game for the first time is a great way at understanding kind of what is good for the game.
What's the most painful lesson you've learned on the journey, if you don't mind me asking?
Painful. It's a shock every time when you realize you don't fully have it figured out. I can sit here and talk like we have a strategy that that we're executing it perfectly and that everything is going to scale 2x a year until we're billionaires. That would be great. But that doesn't happen. There's always a surprise along the way. It can come out of anywhere. The way that the App Store has reorganized starting with iOS 11 changed a lot. It became no longer as profitable to update games and get them featured because the update section on the store got a lot lower visibility. So because of that, we had to shift from saying, okay, we're going to do fewer games a year and make them, just do a lot of updates and update the content to, okay, well, we need to do a lot of games because this is where the exposure is. So, you can realize you have to shift your business strategy. Really, it's just, every time something doesn't work out and you realize, I should have seen that sooner. I should have understood why that wasn't. I think that's the hardest thing. Because sometimes if you make a great game and if it doesn't work out, sometimes it doesn't work out. And sometimes there aren't any reasons necessarily that you did anything that, it wasn't the time. There was another game that launched that week that took away all the exposure. But the ones where you realize you should have seen them coming, those are the ones that hurt, I think, the most. But those are also the ones you learn from the most.
Yeah, of course. And is there anything that you'd have done differently?
Yes, we launched a game called Toy Town, Clobbert's Toy Town. We tried to take Clobbert, the IP, and apply it to a totally different genre. We built a core loop that was massively complicated compared to our other games. It took about 4 or 5 months for the core loop to come together. And by that time, we were so invested in it that despite the fact that it didn't really feel good, we kind of just felt like we had to complete it, which is the sunk cost fallacy, which is really terrible. And it's a totally real thing.
We've all been there.
Yeah. So, that one, we knew that tight game loops were the way to go. We knew that, we should stay within our genre or, kind of our cute, easy to play games. And we kind of ignored that and said, well, we're going to try this. And we learned things from it. But that had, real repercussions. That game did not perform particularly well. It was a huge downer for the people that worked on it. And every game you do, it's an emotional roller coaster. For me as an owner for the company, and also for my partner, but especially for the people that actually work on it. It's really tough to see all these other games doing well, and then to see your game come out and have it perform like crap. So, we try to push every game, like it could be something great, just to try to avoid that. But that doesn't always happen.
No, sure. But then also by the same token, you never know. Sometimes you have a breakaway hit that you're not expecting.
You do, yeah. I have yet to see something that, at least from our perspective, certainly, or from our experience, the ones that are really successful, you see pretty early. And the ones that don't do as great, you see those pretty early as well. And if you try and convince yourself that the ones that have the bad indications are going to somehow turn around, and they don't, which is why it's so important to get things right as quickly as possible, because friction is a really hard thing to fight against.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where the sort of test bed of early users is really helpful.
Extremely helpful, yeah.
So finally, what advice do you have for A, mobile developers just starting out, and B, what advice would you have for more experienced mobile developers?
So for a mobile developer just starting out, or development team, I would say you learn the most from things that you've completed. So get something out quickly to market. You are likely not to have the runaway success that you see in the news. When we put out our balloons game, we thought we were the next Crossy Road, because that was the most visible thing on the market then, and our game was similar in some aspects, and sure, why not? But that's likely not going to happen. And so by putting it out, you'll learn things that, you probably should take other people's word on it, but you probably won't. The fact that you won't really get downloads by just putting a game out, that's probably the most important learning. So put something out quickly, and find a good partner if you can. If you need to be really conscious of what you're good at and what you're not good at. And if you don't know what you're not good at, then find someone who can help assess that for you. And there are, plenty of people out there who can just give you an honest assessment, who have no stake in the game at all. So figure that out. And then for more developed companies, I probably have less advice. I guess I would say, I don't know. We operate in such a different environment. We try to set our expectations around our process necessarily than our outcomes. Whereas a lot of these companies are forced to, especially when they become public companies, really forced to set their expectations around revenues and how many sales, copies they're going to make. The next game that comes out has to be better than the last one. We don't really have those limitations. We can afford to put out games that are, a quarter as good as our best one. And that's still a really nice success for us. So,
and is Hyperbeard funded solely by the profits from its games?
It is, yes. We're a profitable company. We basically have been since day one. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. If the user group would like to contact you, is there a way to do that?
Yeah. So you can message me on Twitter at Alex Kozachenko. It's probably the best way to contact me.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to say or ask us before I stop the recording?
No, I think it's really great what you're doing here. I'm glad that you're doing this month on mobile. It's so different in so many ways to console and PC. But it really is. I think it is a great entry point for new indie developers, and I think discounting it, because I think a lot of people do, because of the games that are put out and the games that are successful, is a bad idea. Because if you can do well on mobile, I think you can then translate that to doing well on console and Steam.
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. And of course, you're always looking for new titles, so developers should send you their concepts or builds to assess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're still looking to publish, and we have to hit 8 to 10 next year, so we're gonna have to find some.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure for me. Absolutely fascinating.
Thanks, Simon.
My faith in mobile.
That's good. All right. Thank you.
Cheers.